Aunt Margareta was very chatty once in the car. So she's talking about they took the bus from Mequon to Conshohocken, and the Schwabs were always late because they had to travel by horse and buggy. Oh, they took the horse and buggy to St. Matthews in Conshohocken. That was before they moved into the city, and then they went to the Jesu. The ones that were younger went to the Jesu. The ones that were older went to Hallahan. Boys went to, and then the boys went to the prep. My mother was born in Port Richmond, but she was sickly as a child, so they moved out to the country, which was to Mequon. And I think her father was a lawyer. Her mother was stone deaf from age 40. And then her father died when she was 17. They had already moved back to the city, so the youngest was 2. So the girls worked, went to work, and pooled their resources and supported the rest of the family. Somehow they got through it all. So Uncle Carl was one of the younger ones. My mother was second oldest. And my father met her in 19...
Were you practicing for the archives?
So at any rate, so my parents met at a Penn St. Joe game, 1926. They got married in 29. And they snuck in beer at the bottom of the house, right? This is my father's story. This prohibition.
Yeah.
Got married at the Jesu. My father went to the prep from Camden with no bridge and no car. Took the ferry.
Swam every day.
Took the ferry over. Went to the prep, the college, and Jefferson with no...
Now, is this the archive, Mimi? I mean, Terry? You're doing this now?
I thought you were.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that.
Okay.
I thought we're going to set this up with a
Well, it's better if you do off the hand.
with a camera,
Aunt Margareta,
proper lighting, have somebody come in and powder, you know.
Aunt Margareta told me that when they moved, my mother never said very much, so Aunt Margareta was very chatty one time, and I drove them out to Uncle Carl's for Christmas, and she told about the horse and buggy taking the St. Matthew's Conshohocken, you know, and they were always late. And then when they moved to the Jesu, they were in the May procession, and she remembers, and it was the Mysteries of the Rosary, or the Litany of Mary, and she remembers that they had Mystical Rose and Cause of Our Joy for the litany, and Aunt Margareta remembered what she was when she was in the May procession. She was very chatty this day. So it's nice to hear those little tidbits. And somebody from over here told us that her brother was in Uncle Carl's class, and that he would go over the Schwabs because they lived right near the prep. He went to the prep. He lived in Haddon Heights, but went to the prep. And Uncle Carl, and that he would go to their house, and they would be counting. The girls would pool their resources and count their money, and then give it to their mother. That's a good human interest story too. Then what else? Then they had their wedding at the Jesu. And Daddy said, "What type of beer in?" We have a picture of that. Of Mother on the front step in her lovely gown. And my father had lots of stories about being a doctor in the Prohibition. He had, Dad can tell you all this. He had Charlie, somebody or other.
Charlie Bodine.
Bodine.
Who was the owner of Camden Brewery. So he took care of all the people that worked in the brewery. And Charlie Bodine anybody who wanted came over from Philadelphia to see a patient of his in consultation, which they would do in those days. They would come over, get off the high-speed line, which was new at that time, and they would, he would treat them to a beer. And since it was regular beer, it was good beer. And Camden beer had a reputation for being good beer. And anyhow, when they made beer, they made near beer, which was legal on Prohibition. They had to make good beer. Then they took the alcohol out and made it 3.2%. So of course, Charlie Bodine had a vat that was making regular beer and another vat that the revenue people would keep their eye on. That was a 3.2. The good beer he would bottle and they would sell as bootleg beer. And Grandpa always had as much bootleg beer as he wanted. And
did they pipe it underground, Frank?
yeah, that was they manufactured in a brewery in South Camden, and they bottled it 6 blocks away. They ran the beer through hoses from 6 blocks to where it was bottled, and then they would distribute it from there. I'm sure by truck or whatever. But yeah, Grandpa. And if you wanted beer, this is particularly after Prohibition, when everything was legal again, they would. The patient came in, and Grandpa needed beer. He'd tell the guy to get down and go to the brewery and pick him up a couple of cases of beer, which the patient would do. And a little while later, Charlie Bodine came up to him and said, "Doc, are you having a problem with drinking?" And he said, "No, why?" He said, "Because last week, like 22 people came down and got 2 cases of beer for you." So he says, obviously, the patients got the idea they could down and ask for beer, and there was no questions asked. So anyhow, Charlie Bodine said after that, "You have all the beer you want, but I need a prescription." So he'd write out, give bear 2 cases of beer, 3 cases of beer, whatever. He would go down there and get the beer using the prescription. So and they would get it at the loading dock, and they would write down 3 cases of beer breakage, and that's how they accounted for the extra bottles of beer that went missing. So
A lot of good stories. And the Prison Dancers lived across the street from us. And we lived in 511 State Street. And the Prison Dancers lived across the street from us. And Mr. Prison Dance, I don't know how you spell it, we'd go with my father, when my father made his house calls. And that Mrs. Prison Dance had a piano, so I had to take piano lessons. And we didn't have a piano yet, so I remember I had to go across the street and go through these beaded things that hang down and go in and practice my piano on Mrs. Prison Dance's piano. And then her daughter eventually became good friends with Marion Kane. Her husband must have died early, so they stayed good friends with the Prison Dance's friend. They had no children, Marion Kane. They lived on 28th Street, about 1 block from where Father Bob is now. But then we got our own piano, and then we took piano lessons. And Vincent sort of took piano lessons. Sister Marie David and Sister Margaret Anita with fascist fingers. But Mimi was goody two shoes, so she did all right. Oh, anyway, and then my father went in the service in the war, 1942, and went overseas, Africa and Italy. And we had a victory garden, and we had wagons that we pull around and collect tin cans for the war effort. I don't know what we did with the tin cans, but we did that, so I remember all that. And my father came home in 1945, and we all cried when he walked in the door. As people tend to do.
McDermott's especially.
Oh, cry again. And Dad had it really tough because his mother died when he was 2 and his father when he was 18.
Yep.
He had it much rougher than I ever had it. I never had it rough.
Well, they were tough days, not only from the fact that my mother died when I was 2. My father, who I really consider my hero, was left with when my mother died, George was 3 weeks old, and I was 2, and a handful, I'm sure. And but he took care of us, and we were always number 1 as far as his priorities were concerned. Great man, really was. And anyhow, George and I owe a lot to him, just for keeping things together. And so eventually, he remarried, and we had our mother, stepmother, actually. I was 7, George was just 5. Matter of fact, he was turning 5 when my father got married. And so we lived in Chestnut Hill for about a year, and rented, and then moved to West Oak Lane into a house that had been renovated, probably built in the 20s. This was in the 30s. The house was about 10 years old, renovated, newly painted floors, varnished, and I have the sales slip still. I think the house was $3,100, and $3,100 in those days was tough. We bought it from an insurance company, I'm sure, that had foreclosed on it. So it was a good neighborhood in the sense that it was in a there were good people in general. We lived a block from the church, St. Athanasius or St. A's, and we had a usual Catholic school upbringing with the nuns, Sisters of St. Joseph did an absolutely great job teaching us, and then as the parish grew, classrooms, the last couple of years in grammar school, we had 3 classes per grade, or if we didn't have 3, we had 2 that were so crowded that the rows, first they put them together, and finally some rows would be 3 across. If it was a fire, we would have burned to death. But the nuns managed it. I remember one class had 100 kids in it, maybe a couple more. And nuns ran that class. Can't say they didn't have any problems, but there's nothing they couldn't manage. And they did a good job, we learned. The sisters were wonderful. And then came time to go to high school. So I took the entrance exam for LaSalle and for St. Joe's. And looking at the two schools, LaSalle was about 8 blocks away. St. Joe's you had to go down by subway, by trolley, then subway. And but St. Joe's was obviously well organized. LaSalle was like an anthill. You know, when you finish the exam, kids were disorganized or running around. At the prep, you out of the class, you know exactly what to do. Went to the cafeteria, went through the line. It was obviously, you know, a well-run school, and which is really one of the reasons why I wanted to go there. In addition to being, I was told it was the hardest school in the city, and I figured if it was the hardest school, that's where I wanted to go. So, you know, tuition was, I got a part scholarship, $160 reduced to $120 a year, and that was $3 a week for 40 weeks. So I had a paper route at the time, and that was about what I could make on the paper route. So I said to my father, I would work my way through the prep. I would serve papers, and then you know, I could pay my tuition. So he said, fine. And I don't think he ever asked for the tuition, but he certainly was very supportive of us, of me, and then eventually George going to the prep. And the prep was it was miserable at the time. It was discipline, and it was hard. They gave you a lot of work to do, and when you're a teenager, at least with my mindset, I did not think spending hours learning English grammar made much sense, or Latin or Greek, but I did it, and certainly as time has gone on, began to realize that it wasn't what you learned, but the discipline of having to do it and learning how to do it that really made a difference. So then I got to be a senior at the prep, and I was so fed up with was I taking Greek in my senior year? I might have been. Anyhow, but I had no language skills. I had three foreign languages. Actually, two of them dead languages: Greek and Latin, and the other German. And we had our German teacher wasn't that good. But it was during the war, and the Jesuits were there in fairly large numbers, but the lay teachers, even though they could get they could be deferred as far as going into service was concerned, you could make so much more working in a factory. So you know, they paid them probably a fish cake a week if they taught in a Catholic school. So we had some teachers that I thought were probably marginal, but the Jesuits were superb and great teachers. So anyhow, wound up graduating from the prep. But in the middle of my senior year, I found out that I could join the Navy, and boot camp would count as the last half of my senior year. I graduated with my class, which sounded very good to me because I just could. I mean, I was up to my ears with learning. Remember, this is in the war. Like the Battle of the Bulge was December of '44, and you just were restless. So anyway, make a long story short, I joined the service and wound up at Great Lakes. And I passed the test to become a electronics technician. So I went up at Great Lakes, and I'm looking in the mirror about the third day, shaving, and I'm having my first experience with the service. And I'm looking in the mirror as I'm shaving, and I say, I am looking at the dumbest nitwit that ever lived, having left a good home and wound up homesick, miserable. But we got through that and wound up being discharged from the service on July 4th, 1946, and starting St. Joe's in September. And I wanted to go into pre-med. I told my father what I wanted to do, and he said, you know, I wouldn't do that. He said, because I can't afford to send you to medical school. And so anyhow, I was a physics major, which was basically a science. Basically, first year was all science, and of course at St. Joe's, we were all philosophy majors, whether you liked it or not. That was the key academic course for every student who went to St. Joe's. 32 hours of philosophy and religion, and not too much religion. Most of it was classic philosophy. It was wonderful. But anyhow, we wound up. My father died in August of '46. I graduated. I left the service in July, and he died about 5 weeks later. Had chest pain, went to the hospital and died within 48 hours. And he, at that point, I kept philosophy, but I kept pre-med in the back of my mind, which is always what I wanted to do. So I wound up at the end of my first year, I switched over to pre-med. I also found that I was working at Marbets in Camden. The store is still there. It was a white tower, and it was the main store for the White Tower. It wasn't called the White Tower; it was called Marbets, which is a step up from the typical White Tower, which is a fast food hamburger place. And so anyhow, I worked at Marbets Saturday and Sunday, 8 hours on Saturday, 8 hours on Sunday, and for 50 cents an hour. So at the end of 2 days, I made $8 minus Social Security. So I took like $7.50 50 cents home. At the end of my first year, looked at my grades, which were mediocre, and I said, if I'm going to go into medicine, I'm going to have to get a lot better grades. And I said, the only way to do that is to not work. So, fortunately, and with the GI Bill, they paid your tuition, and they gave you a stipend, which was like $81 a month. And so I kept 30, and I gave 50 to my mother to pay for household expenses, which she did very easily. And she just, she was a real, very good manager, very disciplined when it came to spending money. Basically didn't spend it. So we wound up 3 years, did not work, devoted all to academics, which meant that I could study the night before the exam, all night long about to get ready for the exam. But it gave me the kind of freedom and leisure that made college really a wonderful time. It was Mom hates to hear me say this, but it was probably the happiest days of my life, just because I had no real responsibilities. You know, it was wonderful. Come back from the from St. Joe's in the fall, beautiful autumn afternoon. Guys would get together around 3 o'clock or so. We'd play touch football for a couple hours, which was just, it was wonderful. Really was great. And so we, that was a great time. I graduated from St. Joe's without a nickel. As a matter of fact, ran out of the GI Bill in the middle of my senior year, so I had to come up with $200 tuition, which was very hard to come by. If you haven't got any money, $200, even though it's not much, it can be enormous. So anyhow, we scraped it together and paid the $200, so I wound up getting out of St. Joe's not owing anything, but basically penniless, with no income, and no way I could go to college or medical school. So I postponed it and got a job with, first job was household finance. And they were advertising in a paper, so I went down to their Philadelphia office, got interviewed by a guy who hops up and says, after the interview, you're hired. Shakes my hand, and he said, now, I'm going to send it to New York, work in our New York office. So I looked at the guy and said, how am I going to go to New York? I said, you know, I have no place to stay. He said, you can stay in a Y. Stay in a Y. Yeah, it's $1 a day, you can stay in a Y. And the amount of money they were paying me for household finance was you know, just about nothing. So I said to him, I said, you know, I can't go to New York. And so he said, well, he thought about it. And obviously, what he was doing was hiring me Philadelphia wages to work in the high, in retrospect, he's getting a cheap hire for New York. Anyhow, I wound up going to work for a household in Philadelphia for 3 days until I quit. Because they're such a, I mean, the money lenders, you know, written up in the gospel as bad people. They are bad people. They're rotten. they'll lend you money, and, you know, at the high rates, you'll be working for them primarily, and they're pitiless, and they're just terrible. So anyhow, one or two bad experiences with the kind of people we had to deal with, not the people that borrowed, but the managers. And I told Household Finance I was quitting. But meanwhile, I got a job with, after that, with William S. Merrill, a drug company, and had a great, great experience with them for 2 years until I got into medical school, and then had enough to get me through the first year saved. And then after that, it was I borrowed. I got a scholarship one year. Borrowed Mrs. Fox, who I worked for in Maine for 2 summers. I borrowed money from a charity that she was familiar with, and so we managed to get through. Then I got married at the end of my junior year, and I was rich. Mom had money in the bank. She paid my tuition my senior year, and
I have no idea how much money I made. You know, I worked at RCA.
Yeah.
And then looking back, I have absolutely no recollection of how much money I made. This is after I graduated from Justin Hill. I worked at RCA. But I don't know how much money I made.
well, it was enough for the two of us.
Yeah.
And I think we quickly went through your money because we bought a car, and I
We lived in Crest Fair Apartments.
right, and I was able to work on weekends at Lourdes in the lab. In fact, they hired me in my freshman year at Hahnemann to work on weekends, like every fourth weekend, every third weekend. Made $100, which was a lot of money. And so anyhow, that really got me through medical school, and certainly helped us when we got married. Then I interned at Lourdes, and I made $200 a month, which was very good for an internship in those days. Interns' pay up to that point was like $50 a month, but times were changing, and the interns were getting scarce. Hospitals started to raise the pay. Medical schools did not. The academic centers kept the payment very low, but they figured if you want a good internship, you know, you would have to sacrifice. I'll make a long story short, $200 a month at Lourdes, which carried us pretty nicely. We paid $75 a month for the apartment, and then $125, well, minus, there wasn't an awful lot taken out of the pay, but probably I had $150, $160 a month over. So $75 would go for the apartment, and the rest would go for expenses, and usually around the 25th or the 26th, I had to borrow $10 or $15 from Grandpa, Dr. McDermott, which I would promptly pay back the first of the next month. Then, after my internship, which was a wonderful year, spectacular, learned a lot, it was just a wonderful experience. I got accepted at Jeff for a residency. At that time, there were 5 medical residents per year. There were 15 medical residents at Jeff. So I was one of the first-year residents, and it was $50 a month. Second year, it was $100 a month. And the third year, it was $150 a month. as soon as I got licensed to finish my internship, July 10th, 1957, I passed my boards and became licensed. Once I got my license, I could work on weekends, and I became the emergency doctor in Stratford, the Stratford area. Worked in Pete Lippencott's office, a great family practitioner, a wonderful man. And I covered 6 or 7 family practitioners in that area, and I worked out of Pete Lippencott's office. It was a wonderful, every third weekend. And so you made $100 usually, maybe 110, 120. But it was cash and one in my right pocket. My right pocket was always my money. If it went in my left pocket, the Internal Revenue got some of it, but that was very infrequent when I was, at a point where I needed it more than they did. That's for sure. And of course, our first baby came in 1956. We were married in 55. And the second one came in 1957. The third one came in 1958, 59, and then the fourth came in 1960. So we had all girls, and we had quite a family. Anyhow, we lived at 34 Maple Walk in South Camden. And what was the name of it?
Crest Fair Apartments.
Crest Fair Apartments. And we lived there for about 2 years. 2 years.
Right before Marion was born. We moved to Glenview.
We moved to Glenview. Anyhow, and that was a very expensive house, $18,500 for a 4-bedroom, brand new home. Which was, and his grandpa said we were moving out to a cornfield.
Oh yeah,
He thought we were moving, and this is a mile outside of Haddonfield.
It was the sticks.
In his day it was.
Yeah.
But anyhow, so we had a good 4 or 5 years there before we moved to Haddonfield. So yeah, it was a great, and that was a wonderful time to start practicing medicine. That I had, it was joy, pure joy. Matter of fact, the first couple of years I thought, if people only knew how much I enjoyed practicing medicine, they would stop paying me, because I would have gladly done it for nothing. It really was just great. Wonderful. Wonderful time. So,
So here we are. However old we are.